Hi, Steve. Welcome to the True Conversations podcast. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Good to see you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good to see you again. Before we start, why don't you give us a bit of overview about yourself, what your current role is, and how you got into where you are today, Steve?
Yes. Well, I've been in the technology industry for over 35 years. Most of that time has been spent in a sales role, sales and a bit of marketing as well. And over the years, I've worked for, sort of very large organizations such as AT&T and Trustwave, but I've also worked for some startups as well. So quite a wide and varied career so far. And really, why I went into technology was really, based on my dad, really. My dad was a telecoms engineer and worked in the Middle East. And I spent my childhood in the Middle East, and he used to take me to work occasionally. And I would, see what he was up to and found that really interesting. So I went and studied at university, electrical and electronic engineering, and then joined a company called Mercury, which is owned by Cable and Wireless, on their graduate scheme. And I was more on the technical side at the beginning, and then quickly moved into the commercial side, and been there ever since. So it's been an excellent, career, very enjoyable. Technology has moved, substantially from the late 80s to where it is now. It's, it's not recognizable at all. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And still a few more years left of me yet.
It's funny you say that because that's how I got into sales as well. My dad was a salesman, and I saw looked like a good career. It looked fun. He traveled a lot. He earned a lot of money, and I was like, "This sounds good."
Yeah.
So although I went to uni and did all the right things, ended up getting into sales. So it's funny how that happens, hey?
Yeah, it is. It is. It is.
So yeah, what I wanted to pick your brains around today, Steve, is around business development, obviously, and something we spoke around before, especially when we worked together. And it's changing at quite a pace. But what do you think of in terms of somebody mentions business development to you? Like, what is it in your eyes? What do you see it as?
Yeah, so business development is, the objective of it is to get you into a position and get you to a relationship level where you can start to sell. There's many ways of going about it, and it is continuously changing, particularly with AI around. Obviously there's some very positive stories and very negative stories around using AI. But ultimately, these days you really have to do your homework, and LinkedIn is, a great resource, for that. And any person that's in sales, even if you're looking after a territory or you're looking after a set number of accounts and you're sort of more, sort of relationship, type person, you still need to do the business development because you need to broaden out the relationships. And I work in my current role with a lot of tech vendors out there, particularly with their go-to-market activity. And what we do find is the relationships are very traditional with tech salespeople. They're sending to the IT department. They know somebody in finance, they know somebody in procurement, they know somebody, as a CISO, for security purposes, etc. But it tends to be quite narrow, to say the very least. Consequently, IT departments are always viewed by the board as a cost center. And when things, are not so hot in the market, guess what happens? They start to cut those costs. My view and what I advise, my customers to do is to broaden those relationships, and build the confidence of the salesperson to be able to go and talk to an HR director or a sales director or a marketing director, a CMO, or even an operations person. But what you need to understand is what they're doing for a living. What are they trying to achieve? And how your company can help them to achieve their objectives, and this is why LinkedIn really helps with that, because you're able to identify those different personas out there. You can look at the output that they're putting on into LinkedIn as a good idea of the topic areas and the interest that they have. And then it's about sort of really mapping what your organization can do to help them to achieve those objectives. And then your sort of marketing messaging and your reach out is then aligned to that. And the chances are, what it's like yourself when you receive, a cold call or a cold email. if it's something that resonates with you, you're going to respond to it, right?
Yeah.
And this is what you got to do now. You got to do your homework. You really got to understand what your customers are trying to achieve, what compelling events are happening out there, and how your organization can help them to meet their objectives.
And
Yeah.
do you think that's obviously business objectives, but also you mentioned it like personal objectives as well? Like that, I think people forget that
Mm,
at the other side of that LinkedIn profile or that email, that is a real human being with a life,
yeah.
with children, with family, with hobbies, and it's sort of everyone's got their own challenges, and I think
Yeah.
it's tapping into that personal side of things as well, which I think people miss sometimes. That we are
Yeah,
still
and that,
human.
that that comes with, developing, the relationship. I've been in situations where, people have actually, my customers come to me for career advice, and they've got a couple of job offers on the table and they're seeking my advice of which one would you go for, Steve? And when you're at that sort of level of relationship, it's really, really it's really, really satisfying. And it's
Mm.
quite nice for people to come and seek advice like
Yeah,
that, who's your actual customer, and the trust is then you feel there's a real trusted relationship there and you can both be open. But I've even, sort of helped people into jobs, changing from one company to another, and helped them along that process as well, but yeah, it's, you're right. The sort of personal element is as important as the day job and what they're trying to,
do you think on that? Do you think people are, especially nowadays, like you said, with the rise of AI and automation and quick wins, people forget that it's a longer term process? Because similar to yourself, like a lot of the relationships I have been over years. Like they're
yeah,
people I've known for a long, long time, which
yeah.
you didn't realize it at the time, but then 10 years later, they turn into a customer. And I think, do you think people are looking at a bit too short sighted when they think about business development?
I totally agree. It's gone like that. I don't agree with it. However, companies are driven by the stock market and quarterly reporting, and everything is hanging on the quarter, and that's a relatively short period of time, right? So people have become more tactical and just grabbing what they can do in order to bring in, or meet their target. And, I've seen it, business right across the board. And in some cases, it's almost monthly.
Yeah,
Targets are, sort of presented monthly and quarterly and annually. And of course, the money flows and the market changes. So what you did last year may not be exactly the same as you do this year, but your
yeah,
target is aligned that way. So you
yeah,
brought in 100K in January 2025. Guess what? Your target's 100K for 2026 in January, but it's 110K because they want some growth in that.
yeah.
But your customer may be on a different, they may be booming or there may be challenging times or whatever the situation is. So yeah, I think the world has kind of forced people to be more tactical. And, I think with AI, things have got a lot quicker. And it's a bit of a juggling act, isn't it? Because you still got to do this long term thing. You've got to have a long term relationship, but you got this target on your head that you got to try and meet.
Exactly.
What are you doing this month? What's happening next month? And I have that reporting right now, is what's happening this month, what's happening next month, and what's happening the month after, right? And you kind of got to fight it a bit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I remember the days now where you got your boss down your neck trying to get the deal over the line before the end of quarter. And you're thinking, I don't want to blow this relationship I've got with this client and push them too much and wreck the whole relationship. So how would you
Yeah.
go about balancing that, Steve? Any advice
Yeah,
on
and
balance?
it goes back to how solid your relationship is with your customer. Because you can be fairly truthful with them. Every company has quarterly targets now. Everybody understands that businesses are trying to get the business in before the end of the quarter, and what you have to do is you have to sort of map it out before the end of the quarter. So at the beginning of the quarter, you look at the deals that have the compelling reason why they should come in within that quarter. Okay. And you map out the sort of process, particularly after you kind of scoped it out and the customer says, yeah, we're really interested. We're going to get some budget. And then you start to map out with the customer what that process looks like. How long's the procurement process? What the steps do we need to go through here? Who's going to approve it? How long does that take? Right. And by doing that and mapping that out, you're able to set the expectations on both sides.
Yeah.
And that kind of removes, I find that removes the pressure. Because if I'm setting the expectation with my boss, who's putting pressure on me to deliver a deal, or can you push this deal, forward, Steve? I've got the information at my fingertips and saying, well, actually, process is A, B, C. And this is where we are with the process. All right, maybe we may be able to accelerate that to try and get it in. But what I'm telling you right now, it's going to be next month. It's not going to be this month. And by saying that with confidence and really understanding the process and mapping it out with your customer that you got the relationship with, sort of takes the steam out of that, I find. But it doesn't stop your boss from asking.
No. But it can also, well, I think he is totally right, is setting that expectation up front and explaining to your customer what the process is, what pressures you're going to get. And then also it can actually help with the negotiation as well, I found, in terms of if you are going to ask for something from your boss, make sure your customer's aware of that and they understand what you need to go through, the hoops you need to jump through to get that approved. And you can actually work it well, get both sides working well and get the deal closed and get a good value as well.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. It's about understanding also the customer's compelling dates. They may need those services on a certain date for a reason. Right? And, that's one of the questions that you can ask very early on, before you're scoping things out. Is there a particular compelling event that you need to meet in order for us to supply this service for you? And that really helps, sort of push it along, to say the very least.
Yeah. And do you think, I've had this before where you think you've got a really great relationship, you move companies, etc., then you go back to that client and you realize you didn't, And I think sometimes, do you think salespeople get a little bit delusioned by sometimes how strong their relationship is with a client, and maybe they're not buying into you personally, they're buying into the company or the product or the service? You ever had that experience?
Yeah. I've been let down by people for sure, and really goes back to what I said earlier about having a broader relationship across your account base, where traditionally, what I find is people may have 4 or 5 different relationships with an account that they're looking towards selling it. The broader it is, the less reliant you are on particular individuals to get it over the line, if you see what I mean. And, you've got all different kind of personalities and people with different objectives and different lives and all the rest of it, and people hold up a persona of professionalism and how they want to be perceived. And sometimes that's a little bit of a false image. Like they may pretend to be really senior. And when it comes down to when you ask the question, you're not able to do it, you realize, maybe you don't have the power to do this. Maybe you're not as senior as what you're making out to be. And I've come across that a few times. And it goes back to having selling to more than one person, so you can go to other people, and get a better understanding. And I had it recently with a client, and because I had a broad relationship with my client, I was able to go to other people and seek their opinion. And then they helped out and I told them what the situation was. And they said, oh, this is going on and that's going on. And they gave me a clearer idea of how to, sort of tackle it and get other people's sponsorship in order to move things forward.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think there's so many times where we did this when we worked together, right? You go to an event, you'd have a dinner, you'd do this, and then you realize it's not the right person you have there. I guess the question is, how do you make sure that you're spending the time and effort with the right person, the right decision maker?
Yeah, well, it's down to the old-fashioned, open questions. What questions you ask them, and really qualifying it properly. And you got to get to know them, right? And there's with sales, that there's going to be a lot of people that you're going to talk to. They're going to take you down, rabbit holes and cul-de-sacs and so on and so forth. And it's the nature of the beast. I think through experience, you can start to see that, coming up with the right questions through the experience. Just like anything in life, you got to fail, right? If you're not failing, you're not really progressing.
Yeah.
And nobody has the answer to it, Tom, but through experience, you learn. Yeah.
Yeah, you
And
learn
we've
who the
all
tough
done it.
guys are. You learn who the right people are to
Yeah,
deal with.
precisely. And that's the only, I've done it loads of times where, particularly when you get on well with them as well, they become a bit of a friend.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I've been down that loads of times,
yeah,
but you learn, right?
yeah. You learn, and also, yeah, you take those relationships with you through your career, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of people come on that journey with you.
Yeah. But it's also about, understanding the business that you're selling into as well. It's more than one person. And particularly, I've always, sort of focused on very large enterprise accounts, huge, complex structure, and lots of people to talk to. And so you're not just relying on the one individual necessarily, but you really need to understand what that business is trying to do and what the challenges it's got up, and there could be, sort of legal challenges as well that they got to get over, or they may have an objective to break into certain markets, and how they're going to go about that. There's a whole host of things that you need to really understand what that business you're selling into is trying to achieve. And
Yeah,
that's why LinkedIn is so good for this, right? It'll give you that sort of intelligence. And when you're talking to somebody, you can then talk with, some knowledge. And that
yeah,
goes down really well if you spent the time to understand the business and what they're trying to achieve.
yeah. Yeah, I was speaking to a colleague somebody I used to work with the other day, and he deals with really large enterprise accounts, and said obviously uses AI a lot to research the
Yeah,
companies. But he said like he does that, but then he go into it and personally look at it and read it and understand what they're trying to do and really get under the skin of what this business is trying to achieve.
yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, you get a bit blindsided by the noise, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
So yeah, on the LinkedIn piece, then how have you used LinkedIn to build relationships? Because it's obviously changed since we were doing it, 10, 20 years ago. But how would LinkedIn to build a relationship, especially within an enterprise account?
Yeah, so on a regular basis, me and my team will have what we call a bit of a call out day, and what we'll do is we'll focus on a particular persona, and it could be head of alliance or head of partners, something like that, and we'll come up with what part of our portfolio would fit that type of persona and what value we would actually bring to them. So then you go on LinkedIn to identify those people if you don't already know them. And then you obviously go into their profile and take a look at what they're pushing out, and what they're commenting. And then you kind of construct, if you don't know them, a first message, which is relevant to them. Looking on, so they may have sent something on, AI infrastructure, for example. So we would then come with a message relating about that. I saw your, excellent report on this. Here's, some further information that you may find of interest. It'd be great to have a call to find out a little bit more of how this is going for you. So it kind of resonates, by doing that, you send out 20 or 30 of these, you may get 5 that come back and 3 meetings out of that. Now, if you just did a blanket and didn't look, you could
Yeah.
send out 100 and get 0, right?
Well, that was going to be my question in terms of, what I guess the certain enterprise level where you are. I understand that approach, but if you were sort of more mid-market or you had more of a volume, target adjusted market, would you be more open to a sort of wider prospecting approach? When does
Yeah,
that balance shift between when you've got to go for volume over the quality?
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, my humble opinion, I don't think volume really works.
Yeah,
I just, a general, we got a webinar coming up, come and join, it just doesn't work. I mean, you have to be more targeted, because there's a lot of digital marketing out there that is pushed out, particularly on LinkedIn. Now, we all receive it, you don't really look at it. You only really look at the stuff that is going to resonate with your good self, whether that's a personal one or whether that's, a particular business area that you are operating in. So I think the mass one just doesn't work, if it's B2C, LinkedIn isn't the platform for that. It's TikTok, it's Instagram that's B2C. B2B, mid-market upwards, is really LinkedIn for that, as far as I'm concerned. But you have to be targeted for it, and you have to do your homework. There's no easy way around it.
And we're so blessed these days because there's so much information at our fingertips, isn't there? Like,
Yeah,
you can see who's at your website. You can see who's like got intent around certain topics. Like you said, you've got LinkedIn to research things they're posting, etc. You've got
yeah,
AI to analyze what the company's doing and all the latest releases. So there's never been more information at our fingertips, right? So
yeah.
how do you, I guess, compared to when you first started out in sales, what difference does that make in terms of prospecting these days of that information at your fingertips?
Yeah, I think, with AI is fairly recent, and, to be honest with you, I'm still learning it. I think a lot of people are there, if they're truly honest about it, because it's an evolving tool, and it certainly, kind of reduces the time in terms of research. And, I've set up alerts on all my customers so that, that comes in on a regular basis. I'm updated straight away. And, when I'm constructing, particular personas that I want to reach out, I'll go to AI and ask him to construct something. Now, I still need to edit it, because you can tell an AI generated email versus, a personal one, right? And like you say, on, sort of LinkedIn, there is so much information there. There's a fair amount of groundwork research that you can do quite quickly. Back in my day, it wasn't quite like that. You sort of Dun and Bradstreet Street, list of telephone numbers and people, and you got your scripts in, pick up the phone and off you go. And of course, making cold calls is probably not the best thing to be doing. It's not something you don't do necessarily, but, people don't answer their phones, right? Whenever I get a call on my mobile and I don't know who it is, I don't listen to it, I don't pick it up or anything, so reach out on LinkedIn. I'm not too sure if email shots work anymore either, but you got to kind of position yourself as the educator, and that's where the webcasts and webinars come into that. And it's about sending information that educates people, informs them, and resonates with them of whatever they're doing for a living. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because there's so much of it, isn't there? There's so many different angles you can take now.
It's fascinating how it's all changed, doesn't it? And I think it is moving more towards that direction, isn't it? Like Truly has been built off the social selling aspect and about elevating your personal brand. And I think it's just becoming more and more relevant to have that, where it wasn't 5 or 10 years ago, right? So it was more the volume game. So
it was. It was.
But the strange thing is actually just being yourself and being personable and being human is becoming even more valuable again, because the rest of it is, there's a lot of noise now in the market, isn't there? Automation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's, it's, like I said earlier, I think it's, you got to become the educator and the trust, and in a way, stop selling. It's controversial, isn't it? Don't sell.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. That's when my career changes, when you stop selling, stop trying to be, be yourself, be honest with people, and build those relationships. And then you'd be amazed at how the opportunities actually open up for you.
Yeah, precisely. And listen, whenever I'm in a meeting, I'm quite quiet and I just listen. And then at the end, you ask relevant questions. But what I'm also finding is people wanted to go back face to face. And I think people want to become a little bit more tactile. We've had many, many, many years, and the pandemic sort of accelerated using Teams and Zoom, etc., etc. Most of my meetings are on Zoom and Teams still. But what I'm finding, very early stages, people wanting to do face to face, and it actually accelerates the sales cycle. And I had one a couple of months ago, and I try to do them on a regular basis. But a couple of months ago, I had one customer, and I looked up and I said, "Can I just come and see you?" And he said, "Yeah, that'd be nice." And they had a fantastic office in Old Street, and I went along there, and they brought another 4 people with them. And we spent about an hour and a half. Within that hour and a half, we got everything done.
Yeah.
everything done. Now, if we'd have just gone on Teams or Zoom, that'd have probably taken a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Trying to organize everybody,
Yeah.
trying to go back and forth with the
Yeah.
agenda and the actions and all that.
Because they're just slots, aren't they? Little half-hour slots or an hour slot,
Yeah.
and everybody's got like 4 or 5 of these going on every day, go from one to the next to the next. And I think, also, sort of going back to sort of more networking events and that type of, it may sound a little old-fashioned, but I think people want to be a little bit more tactile now.
Yeah.
And I
100%.
think that's a very early trend that I'm picking up.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it used to work when we worked together, right? I think you're
Yeah,
having your executive dinners, your meals out, like people want that, right? And I think
yeah,
that's come full circle back around now, and people are
yeah,
craving
I
that
think so.
human interaction, aren't they? So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you have real conversations with people, not just over email, etc. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so do you think, based on that, then, like this, obviously within sales, there's a lot of different skills you need. Do you think being good at business development and relationships is a natural skill, or is it something you need to build on and look?
There's no wrong or right way to do this, and having managed, different sales teams for many years, people all do it differently, to say the very least. And so it's not like, a hard and fast thing, like other jobs, there's a wrong way to do it and there's a right way. Doing business is a bit like being an artist, really, I think. And different people get on with different people. You've got that in the scenario. And it also depends on, what you're selling, what market you're entering. And remember, back when we were working together at Trustwave, I was looking after hospitality and retail. Getting in front of those guys, that was a blank piece of paper when I joined. And I'd never sold into particularly hospitality before. And what we found works really well is, doing our research and finding out what these guys are doing technology wise and where they meet up. And they had various, kind of networking events
Mhm.
and events that they set up on their own all around technology. We went in and we became some of the sponsors of those organizations. And, that got us in front of them and it gave us a deeper understanding of what they're trying to do, where technology played into
Mhm.
sort of hospitality and retail, and how very dispersed it is as well. And that was an approach where we just, and it was a different time because it was quite a while ago, it's just getting ourselves out there and getting yourself a little bit uncomfortable and having to present in front of 200-300 people, but scale it to an understanding and a level that they would understand and what would resonate for them. Bearing in mind, we didn't really have many case studies either to take them through, so it's
Oh,
quite challenging, to
yeah.
say the very least on that. But, after a year or so, they started to, kind of accept us and, invite us in and, we're getting more and more meetings and conversations. And then it started, people started to buy stuff from us and then we could create some case studies that were meaningful and coming from their perspective rather than Trustwave's perspective, to say the very least. So yeah, there's no wrong or right way to go about it. I think you find your way through, like we said earlier, failing, trying stuff.
Yeah.
And then learning from it is, obviously you keep failing and failing, that's not good, right? So you need to learn from it and adapt
Yeah.
accordingly. And some of those people I'm still in contact with today, funny
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got some really good relationships. And that was an enjoyable sector to sell into. It was really, really good. Yeah.
Just good events. Yeah.
Yeah, it
So,
was. It was.
with all this, then I think it's probably a feeling I've had for, but I think it's making. Do you think it's making people lazier, making salespeople lazier? Because we've got so much at our fingertips now in terms of tools, data, automation, and we're looking for that easy win. When actually, maybe it's still the harder stuff: going to the events, meeting up, going to face-to-face meetings.
Yeah.
Think people are getting lazier, and that's why we're looking at these routes. Or
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hiding behind teams, and what I've seen. Even the team that I'm in now. People set up a call, and the bus turns up. With about 3-4 different people. And really, what you need to do, and this is what I personally love doing, is just having a conversation. You go in to try and understand, and you whiteboard it with the customer. and you just sit there, two or three of you, and you say, right, okay, what is it that you're trying to do here? How can we help? And you sit in a room and you do that, or it can be done on Teams as well,
Yeah.
because people are fairly dispersed, and the team, I mean, we're all over the world, right? We've got some people in the States and Australia and France and Germany, so you all can't get into the same room. It's the same for the customers that we're selling into as well. They're very dispersed. But go in and have the conversation. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a sales director, and I said, how's it going? And he said, brilliantly. And I said, why is that? And he goes, well, we're just selling a lot at the moment, Steve. It's just like, it is fantastic. I said, why though? Why do you think that's happening? He goes, I don't know, but we kind of carry on doing it. I said, really? I said, don't you need to, sort of understand you're in a really hot market, but you only got a small market share, or you're in a cool market, but, you got a big market share. Do you understand what your competitors are doing? And he went, yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. And then from there, the conversation kind of changed. And then what we found out is, yeah, it was hot and good at that moment in time. But a few months later, they were struggling a bit, and they needed to understand, where to put their resource, where they're going to get the best return. And that's when they really need to understand, market that they're in, yeah, and where they're resonating, and benchmark themselves. And it's that, sort of conversation. I'm not actually selling anything here. I'm just asking, how are you?
Yeah. Really, really resonates. I remember the times I was struggling in sales, and my dad would say, look, just go and speak to some people. Just go and speak to them. Go and just don't sell to them. Just go and ask them some questions around what the challenges are. And on that, it opens up so much opportunity and builds those relationships. And then also, it's not always that person you spoke to where the opportunity comes from. It might be somebody they refer you to, or it builds, right? But just having that curiosity to go and actually speak to people and ask them questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, I think, people got to build their confidence, in doing this. It's not an easy thing to do, is to, sort of go up to someone and, how are you doing? Ask some questions and stuff. You've got to go in there with some confidence, but you also got to have some knowledge to go into that conversation as well. And that obviously comes with a little bit of experience. I think also, there is, I find over quite a number of years, there is a lack of training on these sales skills, isn't there? For many years, I've not had a sort of training on it. I've just developed it myself. The training tends to be on product knowledge, but not on the softer skills that you actually need. There, Tom, is probably an opportunity for your good self, to expand the business in that direction. Is there isn't enough of this, talking about what we've been talking, on this conversation about different approaches and how you go about things. And, I tried this and this is what's happened. And this is what I try to do in my team on a regular basis is when we're talking about business development, okay, what is your experience this week? What are the failures? What are the successes? And it's not about the product. It's about the approach and what has worked and what's not worked.
Yeah, I think also like people, they try and sell too early. You're trying to sell the big solution early. And the idea of business development is to get the opportunity to show them like what you can do and what the challenges are. But you're not selling the whole service yet. You're just trying to get in the door at the early stage, aren't you? So you don't need to know at all. You don't need to know all the details of how it all works. You need to be able to sell them the idea of, is it worth a conversation on this,
No, absolutely. But I think, it's on my journey, in particular with my customers, where we are advising them on, how they go to market and, who they should be targeting and et cetera, that confidence, when you've had, particularly when you have salespeople that have been really, really successful in selling in the same way for many, many years, and now things have changed and they got to, sell a broader portfolio, or they got to sell to different personas. And there's a really reluctance there sometimes, particularly people of my age that have been really, really successful. So this guy's come along telling us that we need to sell differently now. You know, we need a different approach. And it's important. So if you take, you know, something like the print industry, those guys who've been selling photocopiers for many years are some of the richest people I've ever come across in the whole tech industry, I have to say. You know,
Salesman.
but that area is slowly dying, slowly. Still very profitable, no, but those guys have got to expand their horizons, and suddenly you see, you know, some of the print vendors have got quite large portfolios that are outside of print now, you know, in order to survive as a business, but they got salespeople, marketing people that have been selling print all their life, and they're asking them to sell this other stuff. It's challenging, different personas, different parts of the customers that they need to go to. And it is really challenging for them to do so.
Yeah.
You know, at the very least.
So, I guess, one last question for you then, Steve. If I know you've done this before. I know you've joined many startups and companies, etc. So you start a new business, start a new role, you've got no pipeline, no network in that market. What do you do to drive pipeline in the first 90?
Well, LinkedIn would be a good start. You know, because it will give you some learnings, first of all, of that, you know, if it's a new industry sector that you're trying to break into. And, you know, out of that, you can then come up with, you know, a list of, you know, sort of potential customers that you can approach. You take a look at what they're pushing out on their social medias, not only with LinkedIn, but they could be a B2C company as well, of what they're doing on Instagram and TikTok. And then you can start to identify some people that you can reach out to, look at some events that they're attending and attend those events as well. And, you know, start to build your intelligence up. But also, you know, you got the time ticking, right? So you got a target on your head at the same time.
Yeah, sounds good, doesn't it? You got to get some revenue in eventually.
Precisely. You know, so historically, with the company that you just joined, there may have been some history there. You know, there's friends and family that may have some contacts in there, or some colleagues that you worked with and may have some contacts. So use your network as much as you can and try to get as many, you know, sort of warm introductions and then at the same time, you know, doing some of the cold stuff as well, because you never know, you may strike gold. You'll be at the right time in the right place, right? And be really active and open-minded. And go for it. Put the hours in, and you get that. You get that.
And it doesn't stop, Steve, in terms of when you start your sales career to when you're like midway through it, etc. Like you still got a prospect, right? You've still got to be a prospect.
You have to, and you know, it's surprising how many people are reluctant to do it. You know, I've seen it many times where people come in and they do the business development and they get a couple of accounts and they nurse those accounts to death, right? Because it's easier than doing business development. It's a tough gig. It's a bit like being an actor trying to get your film career going. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do. You know, there's a lot of no's, a lot of rejection. You just have to harden up to it.
Tough game. Brilliant, Steve. No, thanks for that. Really learned a lot as always. Thanks for coming on, and thanks again for your time, mate.
Yeah,
Appreciate
brilliant.
it.
Thank you, Tom.